Hello, fifth grade. Here is your Bible lesson for Thursday, December 2nd. Fix my tie here. Thursday, December 2nd is called Esther, Queen at God's Appointed Time. King Ahasuerus, who was also called Xerxes, was ruler over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. One day, a Jew named Mordecai overheard two of the king's servants plotting to kill the king. Mordecai told the authorities what he had heard, and when the traitors were executed. Sometime after this, the king promoted Haman to the office of prime minister. When Haman rode through the city, the people were to bow down to him. One day, Haman realized that Mordecai didn't bow down, so Haman was very proud of the authority and dignity of his position. Since Haman was very proud of the authority and dignity of his position, he was outraged and decided to come up with a plan to destroy not just Mordecai, but all the Jews. Haman told the king that the Jews didn't obey the law. He said he would pay to have them executed and convinced the king to sign a law to kill all the Jews on a certain day. King Ahasuerus removed his signet ring from his finger and handed it to Haman, telling him to do whatever he wanted concerning the king. Haman's decree was sent out under the king's name to every province in its own language. The announcement stated that all Jews, including women and children, could be put to death and their property taken. When the Jews heard about the new law, they mourned, fasted, cried, and lay in sackcloth and ashes. Mordecai, the cousin of Queen Esther, dressed in rags, covered himself with ashes, fasted, and prayed. When Esther heard that Mordecai was fasting and wearing rags, she sent new clothes to Mordecai, but he refused them. And by the way, one of the reasons she did that was because he was at the front of the palace, and it was forbidden to be in those type of clothing in front of the palace. Then Esther sent Hathach, one of the king's attendants, to Mordecai to find out why Mordecai was acting like that. Mordecai told Hathach that all that had happened and sent a copy of the new law to Esther, begging her to go before the king to plead for the lives of her people. When Esther received Mordecai's request, she was filled with fear. She sent Hathach back to Mordecai to remind him that if she entered the king's inner court without being called, she could be put to death. 30 days had passed since she had last been called to go before the king. There was only one exception to the death sentence. If the king extended his gold scepter, then that person's life would be spared. Mordecai sent a message back to Esther, telling her that perhaps God had put her in the position of queen so that she could save her people. Esther decided to take Mordecai's advice and prepared to enter the king's throne room without an invitation. She sent a message back to Mordecai that he should tell all the Jews to fast and pray for 3 days and 3 nights. Esther and her maidens would do the same. Only then would Esther go to the king uninvited. Mordecai and all the Jews prayed and fasted. After 3 days, Esther dressed in her royal robe and entered the king's inner court. The king was on his throne, and when he saw Esther standing there, he was pleased. He held out his golden scepter, and she went to him. The king asked Esther what she wanted and promised to grant her any request. Esther asked only that the king and Haman attend a banquet that she would give in the king's honor. The king accepted the invitation. He and Haman went to the banquet. While they were eating, the king again asked Esther what she wanted, promising her up to half of the kingdom. Esther invited the king and Haman to another banquet the next day, saying that she would tell him her request then. Haman returned home overjoyed. He called his wife and some of his friends and bragged about his wealth, blessings, and power. He told how he was the only one invited to join the king at the queen's banquet. But he said of all that meant nothing to him as long as Mordecai still refused to bow to him. His wife and friends suggested that he have a gallows built and asked the king the next morning if Mordecai could be hanged. The king had difficulty sleeping that night and asked that a book of recorded events to be read to him. The account of how Mordecai had previously foiled an attempt on the king's life was read. When the king asked whether Mordecai had been honored for this loyalty, his attendant said that nothing had been done. About that same time, Haman came into the outer court to talk to the king about hanging Mordecai. The king brought Haman in and asked him what could be done to honor a man who had pleased the king. Thinking that the king was referring to him, Haman jumped at the opportunity for honor. He suggested that the man be given a royal crown, one of the king's robes, and one of the king's horses. Then the honored man should be led through the streets, and it should be proclaimed to all that the king was honoring him. King Ahasuerus liked that idea, so he ordered Haman to honor Mordecai just as Haman had suggested. Mordecai was dressed in royal clothing and was led through the city on a horse that the king had ridden. The king commanded Haman himself to announce to everyone how the king honored those he delighted in. Haman felt so humiliated that he could hardly stand it. Then the king and Haman attended Esther's second banquet. When the king asked the queen about her request, she told him about the death decree against her and her people. The king was angry. He demanded to know who had proposed this law. Esther pointed and said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Though Haman begged for his life to be spared, King Ahasuerus ordered that he be hanged on the gallows that Haman himself had built for Mordecai. The king gave the royal ring to Mordecai and made Mordecai prime minister in the place of Haman. Then the king wrote a new law, saying that the Jews could defend themselves against anyone who tried to kill them. Oh, how God's people rejoiced because they had been spared. Behind the scenes, God directed every circumstance of his people and his enemies to bring about the survival of the Jewish nation and the outworking of his plan of redemption. That's it. Have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.